I would love to introduce everyone watching to Miles Sarill. I'm going to give you like a quick intro, just in case people didn't read your very long bio, and because it's a really good bio. But Miles, if anyone didn't read it, he is a scientist, he is an educator, he is an enthusiast, and previously he was a scientist with CV Sciences. He was a national educator for them. CV Sciences is one of the foundational CBD companies in the United States, and they really like moved mountains when it came to education and understanding around cannabis. He has authored multiple publications. He has been an expert guest on national radio and has formulated some pretty incredible and award-winning supplements, one of which is my favorite, the CV Acute Immune, such a good formula. And he received his Master's of Science in Experimental Medicine from McGill University in Montreal. And he is currently a research editor on the American Herbal Products Association Botanical Safety Handbook Expert Advisory Council, also known as the HPA BSHEAC. The easiest thing that I've said all day today. And with that, I present to you Miles and his fantastic presentation on the crosstalk between the gut microbiome and the endocannabinoid system. Take it away, Miles.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everybody that's listening and tuning in today, because to me, this is just such a fascinating topic, and it affects all of us. Our gut health is shaped by our emotional wellness, our physical wellness, what we consume, and that includes not just food, but also what environmental toxicants are in our food supply or in the air shape our gut, and what happens to our gut shapes the rest of our body. So, I think one of the big puzzle pieces that we're going to be getting into today is the role for cannabinoids from hemp, from cannabis, in essentially working on the whole body by working on the gut. That's the punchline. Now you don't need to know. We're going to go through this kind of step by step and kind of piece apart how all of this fits together. And I'm just so grateful that Head and Heel could put this on for us. It's been a real pleasure working with Michelle and the team at Head and Heel. It's a fabulous brand, and especially one of their products, CBG. And there's not really many other good brands that offer really like organic CBG hemp extracts out there. And their CBG, I think, is going to be part of the equation when it comes to health of the gut. So without further ado, let's jump into this. None of what we're going to be talking about today is a treatment for any disease whatsoever. That being said, we are going to be discussing researched articles about various health conditions. We're not going to connect those to any dietary supplement that might be sold at any point. But now that we get that out of the way, let's just define kind of the big thrust of today, gut health. And in this, by the way, in my presentations, we're going to be looking at a lot of screenshots of peer-reviewed journal articles, scientific articles, and I'm going to kind of highlight what I want you to take away from each paper here. So gut health is a term increasingly used in the medical literature and by the food industry. It covers multiple positive aspects of the gastrointestinal tract, the GI tract, such as the effective digestion and absorption of food, the absence of GI illness as including normal and stable intestinal microbiota. We're going to be defining what's a probiotic and how that fits into all of this, as well as effective immune status and state of well-being. Now, what does that have to do with CBD? Well, again, while we're just working on our definitions here, as we're all on the same page, CBD is an ingredient from hemp. And users report that it may help in the areas of stress, pain, appetite, and mood. And when you actually look at some of the scientific reports on CBD, you can find that a lot of people are using it for chronic pain, joint pain, anxiety, depression, insomnia, migraine, so on and so forth. So this shouldn't come to a surprise for a lot of us seasoned hemp users. I mean, this is a lot of the things that people report it for. But, when you talk to doctors sometimes, they say, well, wait a minute, I prescribe a different medication for each of these things. And so it's not really in kind of the mainstream scientific paradigm for a single compound to do so many different things. So kind of the question that I want us to have in the back of our heads today is, how is this possible? How is it possible that one molecule from the hemp plant can be useful in the management of inflammatory, metabolic, and neurologic challenges? And of course, you already know the answer, but we're going to get to the why. Is it's all about the gut. And I'm going to kind of tie this together. I'm going to call it the grand unified theory, gut. Any physics nerds out there might be chuckling because, of course, the grand unified theory is really a term meant to express the potential connection between general relativity and quantum physics. But I'm not the one that necessarily came up with this title as it relates to the gut and endocannabinoids, because one of my science heroes who I got the chance to take a selfie with at the International Cannabinoid Research Symposium, Ethan Russo, does have a really great YouTube video titled The Grand Unified Theory, discussing the endocannabinoid system, cannabis, and the microbiome. Now, he brings up some different scientific articles and kind of theses than we're going to be discussing tonight, but I invite you to check out this YouTube video at a later point. And we're also going to be discussing some of the scientific work of another one of my science heroes, Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo, who actually is starting a whole laboratory in Quebec City, focusing on the relationship between the endocannabinoid system and the gut microbiome, and how food and cannabinoids and supplements alters the destiny of one's health through that axis. So we today are going to be defining what the role of the gut microbiome is in human health. And then, of course, that's something that a lot of us health foodie store folk might already be kind of aware of. We maybe already are taking our probiotics, but we can take a deeper dive into that. We're going to define the phenomenon known as leaky gut, which is actually gaining more medical traction. We're going to discuss the endocannabinoid system, the system that's essentially named after the cannabis plant, but it does a lot more than just mediate the effects of cannabis. And we're going to be discussing the role for those plant-derived cannabinoids in the gut and in whole body health. Okay, so now that that is all said, the factoid that we're kind of going to start with, this is our first puzzle piece, if you will, is that about 70% of the immune system is located around the gut. It's called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, and essentially, to the perspective of your immune system, the gut is very much still the outside of your body. And that might sound strange for a little bit, but I want you to imagine a torus, right? Like a donut for a second. And topologically, if you transform the human body, you can transform it into a donut. The gut is essentially everything from the mouth and the tube that goes all the way down to the anus. And so the lumen of the intestines, we're going to be focusing a lot on the colon, the large intestines, as well as the small intestines, because that's where leaky gut happens. That's where the majority of the gut microbiome is resident of the colon. The gut lumen, where all the food's being digested and the bacteria are moving through, that's the outside of your body in many ways. And that barrier that separates the outside of that to then the inside of that, well, all the immune cells are kind of on the inside of that, checking out everything that's being digested, that's moving through. And once that barrier becomes perturbed, that's where some issues might arise. We'll talk about that phenomenon. But let's talk about some of the residents of the lumen of the intestine. Gut bacteria make up a gigantic amount of, there's more bacteria in our bodies than there are human cells. So this is an electron micrograph of E. coli over here. And I want to say that E. coli is neither good nor bad. I mean, there are bad, quote unquote, toxic strains or infectious strains of E. coli. But a lot of our natural gut flora is just E. coli that are present. So bacteria are small single cell organisms that quickly replicate. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that whereas it takes one human cell to replicate perhaps once every 24 hours, bacteria tend to replicate once every hour. And that's why, of course, if you sepsis, where bacteria gets into the bloodstream, they start growing out of control, it becomes a problem. And these bacteria can be infectious, or they can be commensal. They can work alongside of us. So, there is this kind of concept of good bacteria versus bad bacteria. But the fact is that some of the bacteria that we think of being as bad are good in different parts of the body. Like there's parts of your skin that naturally have staph on there, and it's not killing you or eating a hole in your skin because it's part of the community of other bacteria, and they're all kind of keeping each other in check. Now, what happens is when you feed that community of bacteria different substrates, different food sources, it can alter the community and lead to worse or better conditions. And as I pointed out, the microbiome, it's not just about the gut, it's the skin, it's the mouth, it's everywhere. Now, as I alluded to previously, the number of bacteria in the body have been estimated to be as many as 3 to 10 times more than the number of human cells. So we're talking about like you are home to 100 trillion bacteria. And yes, they do affect the way that you feel. I will also point out, although we're not going to be talking about them as much today, that other players of the gut microbiome include a species called archaea, some types of single cell eukaryotes such as candida. It's only because it becomes a problem when there's a ton of candida. And then viruses. There are certain even probiotic viruses that target certain types of bacteria. So think about what babies do, right? Think about how we consume these microorganisms normally. It's not like we evolved taking probiotic capsules, right? I mean, what babies do is they sample, especially when they're young, they sample their world by touching things and putting it into their mouth. And by and large, that's a good thing. And there's all this research now indicating that kids that grow up on farms rolling around in dirt have stronger immune systems than kids that were raised in more sterile environments, because in that early stage when we connect to our environment through consumption of probiotic foods or just even bacteria that is sitting on a chair, etc., that informs our immune system of the world around us. What did I say? 70% of the immune system is located around the gut. So the immune system sees all that, they become tolerant to a diversity of different bacteria. And especially the probiotic commensal bacteria help to protect us. So now this is an electron micrograph image of the classic probiotic Lactobacillus acidophilus. And these bacteria are probiotic because A, they outcompete infectious bacteria. If you can imagine a pool of bacteria and they're all seeking out food, the probiotic bacteria might do a better job at eating up a certain food and therefore growing and outcompeting some of the, quote unquote, bad strains of bacteria. They also are important because they synthesize nutrients for us, certain B vitamins, the conversion of vitamin K1 to K2, for example. There's also emerging evidence that there's certain lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, for example, that are producers of neurotransmitters, right? So as we kind of start to discuss the gut-brain connection a little bit later on today, bear in mind that having the right types of bacteria in the gut might mean that you literally have these microorganisms producing serotonin. By the way, serotonin was first discovered in the gut nervous system. It was called enteroramide. The gut nervous system is also called the enteric nervous system. So there you go. They promote digestion of macronutrients, fiber, feeding probiotic bacteria with prebiotic fiber stimulates those probiotics. And as I was discussing previously, they're immunomodulators, and they can also regulate hormones and neurotransmitter functions. Actually, for certain types of hormonal issues, sometimes related to kind of like estrogen dominant issues, it's really important to make sure that you have good gut health, because those probiotics transform some of the hormones so that they're not active, they don't bind to estrogen receptor, for example, and then they can be easily excreted from the body. But that's sort of a side note. So let's talk about that barrier, right? What I say, the gut is, imagine we're all walking donuts, we're all Tauruses. The lumen of the gut is technically the outside of your body. It's continuous with your skin in some ways. So this is where all of the bacteria are hanging out. Now these little squares over here with the circles, those are cells that are lining the gut barrier, these epithelial cells. And they have tight junctions that keep them tightly bound together. But here's the catch. They need to be thin enough to absorb nutrients, protein, vitamins, etc. And they need to be thick enough to repel undesirable toxicants, undigested food particles, certain types of bacterial toxicants. We're going to talk about something called LPS, for example. Well, let's take a look at these little pills over here, these little purple shapes. Those are our probiotics. The red, those are the pathogenic bacteria, if you will. So, you know, the areas in which the probiotic bacteria are helping is in the production of compounds that fight against bad bacteria. They're playing on the surface of the gut epithelium. They stimulate the production of mucus that helps to line the gut, and they stimulate the immune system, 70% of which is adjacent to the gut epithelium here. So let's kind of zoom out just a smidge. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to show you this schematic that is a healthy gut environment. So again, we have the lumen, all the food is being pushed through here, etc. We have the healthy epithelial barrier. You have the peacekeeping probiotic bacteria outcompeting the pathologic bacteria. And look, on the other side of this single cell layer of this barrier, you have all these immune cells. You have these plasma antibody producing cells that help to catch bad bacteria. You have these helper cells that signal to other aspects of your immune system in the lymph, in the bloodstream, etc. This Th17 cell, for example, is a mediator of responses that help to essentially guard the gut. But something I want to point out for you is that certain types of neurodegenerative and autoimmune diseases are actually related to an excess amount of Th17 activity. So I'm talking about like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis. And oftentimes what happens is that due to an altered gut environment, so now we're moving over to the right-hand side of this schematic, and maybe that's due to antibiotics, or you're eating cheeseburgers every day, or other types of pollutants, Roundup, glyphosate from factory farms, stress. All of that leads to dysbiosis, which is defined. Everyone listen, dysbiosis, a decrease in the probiotic bacteria and an increase in the pathogenic bacteria. And that can be caused by all of these altered conditions. And what happens is that dysbiosis causes all this chaos in the gut. They start shedding bacterial cell components that damages the tight junctions in the gut epithelium. And all of a sudden you have all the bacteria and gluten and other undigested food particles and toxicants crossing the single cell barrier. And now all of these immune cells that are on the other side of the barrier are saying, uh-oh, what's going on? I don't like that. They start responding to that. Especially Th17 cell starts responding to that. And you're actually finding this is essentially leaky gut, what we're talking about right now. The translocation of unwanted particles from the lumen of the gut into the lymph and into the bloodstream. And that triggers the immune system. And that has been found to be associated with autoimmune conditions that are mediated by some of these immune cells that should be protected. So again, this altered gut environment, diet, stress, emotional stress, environmental stress, antibiotics, etc., dysbiosis, that altering of the community of the microbiota, the bacteria, leads to intestinal barrier dysfunction, aka popularized as leaky gut. Okay, so now let's go back to that first paper that we looked at, gut health. Any impairment of the GI barrier can increase the risk of developing infectious, inflammatory, and functional GI diseases, as well as, and this is important, extraintestinal diseases, stuff outside of the intestines, such as immune-mediated and metabolic disorders. Leaky gut has been found to be associated with certain types of insulin-resistant disorders, including metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, maybe even PCOS, and of course, type 2 diabetes. And there's a lot of things that cause this. And I find, I want to show you this next paper over here, because I think for me, it really ties together the way in which emotions and stress and physiology are all tied together. And also I like that we have a peer-reviewed scientific article that you can find on pubmed.gov with the word leaky gut. This is no longer the stuff of health food store. It's published in Psychoneuroendocrinology. Try saying that 3 times fast. And they're finding that marital distress and depression are associated with leaky gut. And that so we're going to be talking, there's a component of a certain type of bacteria, and it's called lipopolysaccharide, and LPS for short. LPS triggers certain types of immune dysfunction. It's highly inflammatory. So as a part of bacteria, normally no leaky gut, no LPS is flooding into your system. You have leaky gut, you might have some LPS at a low grade coming in and triggering inflammation in the body. So what they found here in this study, a highlighted part of this, is that they're looking at individuals and they were surveyed for whether or not they had some type of mood disorder or if there was distress in their marriage. And they found that participants with more hostile marital interactions had a higher level of lipopolysaccharide from bacteria floating around in their bloodstream than those that were less hostile. And the authors go on to conclude that this data illustrates how a distressed marriage and mood disorder history can promote a pro-inflammatory state through increased leaky gut, through increased gut permeability. And that in and of itself would fuel more inflammation-related disorders. Now, as a side note, I have heard some people say that CBD has been great for their marriage. So there might be a intestinal component to that. And again, yes.
I love that. I also, in the aisles of health food stores, have heard that multiple times. So this is really putting things into perspective. It looks like we do have one question from Teresa.
Fabulous.
She's got a raised hand.
Yes.
So just in case you missed that, I wanted to let you know. Also, I can't show my video because now you're the host. We're back at it again. Earlier in the conversation, he couldn't show his video because he wasn't the host. So we're just having a grand time. So I just thought I would let you know that I'll just pipe up if I need anything. But
please, yes, and to the whole audience, interrupt me, and Michelle, please interrupt me and help me. So let's read out the question. Can you tell me the causal relationship between marital distress and LPS? Yeah, so it's sort of like one of the phenomenon might be that when we're stressed out and our cortisol levels go up. Now, cortisol is anti-inflammatory. It's an immunosuppressor. But one of the things it can do is when we're in this fight or flight state, I want you to imagine for a second that leaky gut's neither good nor bad, that everything has a biological purpose. So imagine you're trying to run away from a tiger. You're a hunter-gatherer 10,000 years ago, and you just ate some berries, and now you need to absorb all the nutrients and run away. You're in a fight or flight state. The gut opens up for you to absorb those nutrients. And it's, you go back home, you escape the tiger, thankfully, and you can rest and not worry about it anymore. Now, in a modern day challenge, under constant stressors of bills and work and traffic and marital distress, that emotional dysregulation and cortisol can cause a prolonged opening of the gut, if you will, and can lead to sort of the leakiness that lead to the LPS from the bacteria getting into the bloodstream, triggering inflammation. And that in turn would have a cyclical effect, because stress also leading to the dysbiosis, the imbalance of good and bad bacteria. You're going to get a decrease in the healthy bacteria that produce serotonin and other, dopamine. GABA is produced by as a neurotransmitter produced by gut microbiome. So that just kind of is the tip of the surface, but this is some of what we're kind of unraveling today. Let me just check the chat as well.
That was great.
Yeah,
I think we're all good in the chat. Just just waiting for Teresa. Okay.
Yeah, so adrenaline, also called epinephrine, that's kind of like the quick response. That's what really gets you going. And then cortisol is sort of the secondary, longer term hormone response. And now cortisol is again, neither good nor bad. Cortisol helps us rise in the morning. Its levels gradually kind of fall off later in the day, especially as melatonin rises. Melatonin and cortisol are hormones that work opposite to each other. But what happens when we become chronically stressed out, and sometimes this is associated with a gut issue, is that kind of relationship between cortisol and melatonin becomes dysregulated. I mean, how many people, does this sound familiar, especially those of us that work in health retail, folks that describe not being fatigued and having energy problems, but then they're up all night because they can't fall asleep, and then they can't wake up in the morning. You know, that might be a melatonin cortisol imbalance, and you know, some of that might have to do in some way with a dysregulation of you know, some of what's happening in the gut. So I'm going to move on, and I want to share. Actually, do we have one more question? So it can be circular. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think so much of biology are these cyclical pathways, and homeostasis is the goal of biology. Homeostasis is, you know, that we receive all these energetic inputs, and our body essentially is evolved, you know, for over the course of millions of years, the mechanisms to allocate resources properly to kind of adapt to environmental changes of any kind. And diseases essentially occur when we lose the mechanisms to adapt to those changes. Yeah. And so now this is really, we're about to touch upon the endocannabinoid system. How's my timing actually? Because I might need to move things along a little bit. Endocannabinoid system is described as this great homeostatic regulator. And so we'll get into that very shortly. So again, just this paper over here, that this translocation of LPS from the gut into the blood is associated with everything from inflammatory bowel diseases, IBS, alcoholic liver disease, non-alcoholic liver disease, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, kidney disease, heart failure, depression, etc., etc. I mean, that kind of sounds like every chronic degenerative disease that allopathic medicine can sometimes struggle to manage. And now I want you to kind of keep this list in mind, because I'm going to thread a needle here, because we're now going to start talking about the endocannabinoid system. And actually, just real quick, before I start talking about the endocannabinoid system, is there anyone that wants anything about the gut and leaky gut clarified before I move on? I once did a talk kind of like this, and we got to the end, and then someone asked, what's leaky gut? I'm like, okay, all right, let's just make sure that we're all on the same page here. All right, going once, going twice. So that list of all those issues associated with leaky gut, I think sounds a little bit like this list of these issues that are associated with endocannabinoid system. So this is an article, NIH Public Access. George Kunosh is a really important scientist at the National Institutes for Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse. Talking about, you know, like a government-funded scientist. They're talking about cannabinoids. And they say that modulating this endocannabinoid system holds promise for a broad range of diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular diseases, inflammatory disorders, obesity, metabolic syndrome, pain, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, I don't think it's a coincidence that the list of leaky gut related issues is similar to the list of issues that occur when endocannabinoid system becomes dysregulated. And we're going to talk about that relationship. So what is endocannabinoid system? The endocannabinoid system is a signaling system within your cells. It signals from one cell to the other, and it conveys information about cellular energy, inflammation, changes in the brain, changes in the environment. And it does that through these enzymes, receptors, and signaling molecules, these ligands, tomato. So essentially it's this three-legged stool of this biochemical machinery that helps our cells say hi to each other and coordinate this response. And so a little bit of a similar, a more simple image, if you will, is that we have cannabinoid receptors. The CB1 receptor is found very prevalent in the brain. It's not just mostly in the brain. The CB1 receptor is actually the most abundant neurotransmitter receptor in the brain, most abundant G protein coupled receptor in the brain. The CB2 receptors are mostly found in cells of immune lineage, immune cells. And of course, we've been talking about the immune system a lot already as it relates to inflammation in the gut. So, but you can find these receptors all over the place in the skin, the lungs, the liver, etc. And so that scientist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo, he pointed out in 1998 that the role of the endocannabinoid system is to help our body relax, eat, sleep, protect, and forget. We are familiar and learning more every day about the plant cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, CBD, which does not get you high, and THC, which does. And they look nothing like the cannabinoids that you produce in your own body. So we do have molecules that are produced in our own body that bind to cannabinoid receptors. The one that everyone likes to talk about is called anandamide. Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss and joy, because the scientist that discovered it in 1992, I believe, was so Raphael Meshulam is an Israeli scientist at Hebrew University, and he actually discovered the chemical structure of THC in 1964. And then for about 30 years, they had no clue how THC worked until Alin Howlett in the United States discovered that we have cannabinoid receptors, which then caused them to go, oh, wait a minute, we got to find out what binds to those receptors. And it was there was Bill Devane is his name. It was actually a scientist in Meshulam's lab who is a meditator as well. He's kind of interested in Eastern philosophy. And so when he found our body's bliss molecule, he named it anandamide. And anandamide and these other lipid molecules are derived from essentially the fat that's all around our cells. And they get released and they bind to the receptors. And then they can cause hunger responses, they reduce inflammation. In the case of THC, THC binds to the CB1 receptor, gets you high. And it has other benefits too, of course. Now, what I want to point out is that CBD doesn't bind to those receptors at all. What CBD does is it actually blocks the degradation of anandamide, our bliss molecule. So it can help to modulate or elevate the tone of some of these endocannabinoids without directly causing a psychoactive effect by binding to the receptor. Now, we're talking about cannabinoid receptors. We have cannabinoid receptors all throughout the gut, all throughout the small intestine. So we have these cannabinoid receptors that are present on the 70% of your immune system that's present adjacent to the gut. You find them in the gut epithelium itself. You find them in the gut nervous system. It's everywhere. And so what I want to highlight is that these receptors are responsive to a lot of dietary and nutritional interventions. Take a look at this. Let's go back to our probiotic friend, Lactobacillus acidophilus. Lactobacillus modulates intestinal pain through cannabinoid receptors. So there's a lot of ways to engage and modulate these receptors in the gut. And I just think it's a very attractive idea that one of the benefits of consuming probiotics is because they alter the levels of certain, the endocannabinoid system in the gut, essentially. Okay, so what about leaky gut? So this was a human randomized controlled trial that was done at the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. And it shows that there's a compound PEA, which I'm a huge fan of, but we're not going to talk about today, as well as CBD from hemp, prevent inflammation-induced leaky gut. And what they did is they actually used a marker of leaky gut. And it's not a perfect model. They gave humans a bunch of aspirin, which, of course, is bad for the gut. And then they gave them CBD, and they found that over the course of a couple of hours that CBD significantly reduced the aspirin-induced gut leakiness. Now, in my experience, when it comes to actually healing gut-related dysbiosis and issues, and this is actually my own personal experience, it probably takes about 3 months of taking the right herbs, cutting out the foods, maybe gluten, maybe dairy, maybe in some cases red meat or excess sugar for some people, to heal the gut and to start to see physiological changes. I think a really strong, literally a red flag of a leaky gut type of situation is eczema. I think that, that there's like I said, the skin is continuous with the lining of our gut. When we do see those challenges in the skin, they're often representative of what's happening in the gut. And what I'm not saying here is that CBD is the cure for everything, but it's going to be part of the equation alongside your probiotics, alongside your fiber, alongside some of your really good antimicrobial herbs to help correct dysbiosis, like oregano or cat's claw, for example. Now, this paper just kind of blows my mind. This is, again, a little bit technical, but I want to share with you what's going on here. They're looking at a combination of THC and CBD in treating a mouse model of multiple sclerosis. And, they found that when you give the mice THC, CBD, it actually helps with the symptoms of MS a lot. But here's where it gets, this is what wows me over here. What they did is treat mice that had MS with THC and CBD. And then they took those mice and they took their feces, their poop, and they did a fecal transplant from those mice into mice with MS that were not given cannabinoids. But then those mice got better. Those mice got better. What that means is that the effects of cannabinoids on highly inflammatory autoimmune issues, at least in mice, work by changing the composition of the gut bacteria, changing the ratio of the good to the bad bacteria, and remodeling that gut microbiome. And that's what had the anti-inflammatory effect. So that just blows my mind. I mean, that's an incredible paper in my view. Okay, so we're going to move on to some other topics in cannabinoids. We're still going to relate this to the gut. Is there anecdotal evidence? Yeah, so actually it's not even anecdotal evidence. There's a drug that's approved in 29 countries that is a combination of THC and CBD that is used for multiple sclerosis related spasticity. It's called Sativex. It's not legal here because it has THC in it. So you can thank the DEA and the FDA for that.
Womp womp.
Womp womp. So I want to start talking about CBG for a second, and I want to highlight Head and Heal's process. Michelle, you were just talking about planting season, right? I don't know if you want to mention anything on this slide real quick.
Yeah, one of the most important things, and I've talked to Miles about this quite a bit, is that we are completely seed to shelf. So that means that all of our products that are coming from our lab, from our farm, right now we're planting all of them on our farm, with the exception of a CBN, which we will eventually, now that we can grow THC, we're just waiting on a processing license for that, but that's a different, longer tangent. But being able to have everything grown outdoors and sustainably farmed, as well as regeneratively farmed, yields stronger plants that have wider varieties of cannabinoids. So our CBG is a single strain that comes from Oregon CBD, and it is called CBG White. And so we get all of our CBG and process it the exact same way that we would all of our CBDs, which is in-house through an ethanol extraction. So that's like the skinny.
And I want to point out here is that when you look at this crude extract, I mean, that's beautiful to me because we've been talking a lot about individual compounds. A lot of scientific studies, of course, are with isolates, etc. But when you have a plant that has 500 different molecules in there, you get a crude extract that's teeming with fatty acids and terpenes and cannabinoids. And that full spectrum, I believe, holds greater therapeutic promise for some of these issues. And we're going to talk about, some of those other compounds aside from CBD and what role they're going to have in the gut. And when you look at cannabis or hemp, it's a buffet of different compounds with different parts of the plant having different compounds, different antioxidants can be found in the seeds. You get most of your cannabinoids in the glandular trichomes, etc. And so, I love this paper, The Plant of 1001 Molecules, where you get cannabinoids, you get these terpenes, the smell molecules, some of which are anti-inflammatory, some of which are involved with relaxation. You get fatty acids, omega-3s included, which also do have an important role in gut health, and you get other types of vitamins. So when it comes to the cannabinoids specifically, we talk a lot about CBD and THC, but there may be as many as 145 different phytocannabinoids from the plant, and each one of them work in a little bit of a different way. Most of them don't bind to the cannabinoid receptor. THC, of course, is well known for binding to CB1. CBG binds to it a tiny amount, so does CBN, and that gives it unique and different properties than what CBD does. And so again, looking at the combination or the difference in the chemical structure between CBD and THC, CBG, when we're going to be talking about that, I like to refer to as the mother, because CBG and its acidic form, CBGA, which is found present in the raw, unheated, undecarboxylated hemp extracts, CBGA gets converted by enzymes into either THC with heat or CBD with heat. But CBG in and of itself has some really important properties in and of itself. I also want to point out, the plant doesn't make these compounds for us to get high from. They serve ecological roles in the plant's life cycle. They attract pollinators, they deter pests, they protect the flowers from UV radiation. They have a lot of different roles, and it just so happens that they have benefits in the human body. And I think that in some ways that's a coincidence of nature. Although some would argue that, humans have been cultivating cannabis for 10,000 years at least, and that perhaps we've evolved alongside of it. But the endocannabinoid system is ancient and is basically found in almost every multicellular organism, except for insects for some reason, but that's another story. So to kind of simplify this image, this is straight from the head and heel typical retailer training. Again, they're getting an organic plant that has low amounts of the enzymes that process CBG into either CBD or THC. So it just makes higher levels of CBG for them to extract into an oil. Now, as it applies to the gut, tie this all back into gut health. Now, a meta-analysis is basically like when scientists take all of the papers that they could find and determine that they're relevant and correlate that data. And usually a good meta-analysis means a lot. So they did a meta-analysis on the effects of cannabinoids of many kinds, both endocannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids, these designer drug cannabinoids, et cetera, And they found, and I quote from the article, analyses suggested that CBG caused the greatest reduction in a biomarker called MPO, myeloperoxidase, followed by a synthetic compound. So what is MPO? MPO, well, my camera just went out. I guess it got a little bit too hot in here. I apologize. MPO is expressed in higher concentrations of patients with more severe forms of IBD, colitis. When measuring treatment efficacy, MPO levels are indicative of the quality of response. And MPO may serve as an important diagnostic and prognostic tool in assessing IBD status. So to me, I just think it's so cool that there's scientists out there that are finding that out of all of these designer drugs, out of all these endocannabinoids, cannabigerol, CBG, naturally present in hemp, is the strongest in this paper, but it's a good paper. And there's others that agree. In this paper over here, the pharmacological case for CBG, they're pointing out the same thing. So I'm not going to go over this too much, but just know that scientists are out there learning every day about the benefits of these compounds. So this just about brings us to the end. I want to share with you some suggestions. That was all the science. Now let's talk about products which can't be used to treat any disease whatsoever. CBD can be used to support gut health. And research indicates that CBD can be used to support a healthy inflammation response in the gut. For those that are looking to maintain gut health, my recommendation, of course, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a science nerd, start with about 10 to 15 milligrams of CBD twice daily, and work up to 30 to 40 milligrams of CBD. Additional research shows that when you combine CBD with fish oil, it could be any fish oil. My personal favorite, I like Wiley's Finest. I also like Nordic Naturals. The combination of CBD with fish oil, you can enhance the benefits of CBD. Of course, there's certain probiotics that you can take. I'm a big fan of certain soil bacteria. I've used Just Thrive before. Beekeeper Naturals, it's kind of a newer brand, smaller brand. They have a really nice product. But for those of us that are looking for really targeted support for the gut, someone that might have an advanced challenge as it applies to the gut, I'm going to also recommend that you incorporate CBG together with that CBD. And like I pointed out before, I'm grateful that Head and Heel has a wonderful organic CBG product. With CBG dosing, start small, work your way up, because people respond differently than CBG to CBD. And then just as a bonus factoid for you, although CBN is marketed for sleep, there was a new paper that came out that showed that it might have anti-aging properties mediated by a certain antioxidant transcription factor. So, and it might not just be about your, beauty sleep, helping with wrinkles, etc. There might be a deeper, response associated with supplementation with either CBN or CBG. Now that concludes today's talk. Again, what I want to emphasize for all of you today is that we learn more about CBD and hemp and these cannabinoids every single day. And every time I give a presentation, anything like this, it's going to change because there's more information coming out. So, stay tuned. Thank you so much for participating and listening in tonight. It really is all about that gut-brain connection. And I think we can harmonize that response with Head and Heel cannabinoid extracts.